Bluegill or brim, shellcracker, red ear, some kind of small sunfish is a big part of bass fishing because that is a forage that lives on every lake in this country. And there's a lot of baits that imitate a bluegill. I am from Florida. Bluegill is the main forage for bass in Florida, so I've grown up fishing around bluegill. And a bluegill, to me, being a shallow water fisherman, is a major confidence booster. Anytime I am around bluegill, even if I haven't seen a bass there, caught a bass there, I still have confidence that there could be a bass not too far away. So a bluegill is always a good sign in bass fishing, and I want to kind of dive into what a bluegill means and explain a few baits that you can mimic bluegill with that you wouldn't necessarily think you're mimicking a bluegill with. So let's dive into the baits because this is important rather, and it's not something that makes a whole lot of sense when you and I look at it. So the first bait that mimics a bluegill is a brush hog. Anyone that's ever seen a brush hog, first thought is, what is that? Is that a lizard? Is that something that lives in the lake that we've never ever seen in person? And it's neither of those. It is a bluegill. Now I get it looks nothing like a fish. It looks closer to a person than it does a fish. What are you talking about? How do you think that this is a bluegill? But hear me out. Now, a bass doesn't see what we see, nor does it just sit there for a bass to get a good look at it most of the time. A brush hog is a big profile. It's bulky. It's bulkier than a worm. It's about as long as a worm, but it just has a bluegill-like feel to it. For whatever reason, a bass is an opportunist. They will eat whatever comes their way, and they are ready for a bluegill at all times. They may be eating shad, they may be eating crawdads, but if a bluegill gets near them, they will try to eat it. Well, this just is one of those baits that doesn't imitate a shad, it doesn't imitate a crawdad. It's bulky, it's big, and it is the best way to imitate a bluegill. I will tell you the best time to fish this bait is in the post-spawn. Big creature style baits work the best in the post-spawn. They work during the spawn, and that's what bass are either feeding on in the post-spawn, bluegill, or protecting their eggs from bluegill. So this is a killer. And again, I can't explain this in the way a bass sees it, but I just know that post-spawn, spawn, this is one of the best baits you can be throwing. And I think it's because it imitates a bluegill. Now, a square bill, this one makes a lot of sense, but the number one color to imitate a bluegill is chartreuse blackback, chartreuse copperback. And that doesn't make sense because bluegill are typically greenish color. They kind of have a dark hue to them. If it's in green or clear water, they're typically pretty green, pretty dark. If they're in really tannic or stained or darker colored water, they're usually more of like a brownish purple. But either way, this yellow one doesn't make a whole lot of sense for a bluegill. But again, the bait is not coming back to the boat perfectly like that. It is turning and shaking. So all they're really seeing is a hue of some chartreuse and some darker hue. And that is what a square bill does. So the best color is not the one that's called bluegill or brim. It is chartreuse brownback, chartreuse blackback. So a square bill in a chartreuse color is your best bet when imitating a bluegill. And this works in clear water or stained water. Typically, it is always a good color for stained water, but it works in the clear water too because it's just matching what they're typically seeing when they're eating bluegill. Now, the most obvious color for imitating a bluegill would be just your green pumpkins. It's a dark, natural color. A chatterbait is one of those baits that just comes back to the boat like this. It might kick, but for the most part, it's just swimming back to the boat like this. So you don't have to get all crazy with colors when it comes to a chatterbait. a solid green pumpkin or maybe a little green pumpkin in chartreuse is about all you need when you're trying to imitate a bluegill with a chatterbait. So those are 3 baits. I pretty much talked about the time of year where the bluegill really plays. Now, there are some lakes where, like I mentioned in Florida, the forage is mostly bluegill, but on all the other lakes where you have all kinds of different types of forage, a bluegill is the best in the post spawn. It fits what a bass likes to do in the post spawn. Eat one big meal after they get done with the spawn and then head out. So a bluegill is perfect for that. So learn how to imitate a bluegill. Get you a few baits that do that. Good luck to you, and I'll see you guys on the water.